What kind of similarities would you have between Westbrook and Christopher Nolan through this metaphor?
Westbrook is like such a breakneck pace, and Nolan is so often doing no action movies or adventure movies, and so the pacing suits the medium too, or like the subject matter. When you're shooting, war scenes in the Odyssey, or Batman fighting Joker, you want the audience to feel excited and on a bit on edge. And I think that Nolan does a really good job playing into the feeling that he's able to evoke from an audience. And I think that especially with Westbrook retiring. I mean, I obviously didn't know at that time, but I've watched a lot more of him recently. The times that Russell is slowing down, it's still a lot faster than other people slowing down, but that's just because he's usually at Mach speed. Like, he's so often he would grab a defensive rebound and just go at a breakneck pace. And I think that his understanding of I can still be a quick decision maker, or I can still be a fast player, but I can slow down just enough to create this advantage. One of my favorite, my favorite pass from him is when he does the sham god until the dump off to Steven Adams. It's just a great example of like the change of direction, the pacing, and then the showmanship too. And like
that effective flair is the term
Yeah.
that I use, where like
Yeah.
he's not being a showboat. He's so good at basketball, he can throw three different elite moves into a highlight. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like LaMelo, the way he plays too. It's like, this is just what he does.
Yeah, it's a functional showmanship. And then I think a lot about like the technical aspects of some of the things that Nolan has done. Like, when you see that wave in Interstellar, or when he opens the movie, I think I talked about in the video, he opens The Dark Knight with a 7-second shot of Joker
Right, with the
zooming
mask.
in onto the mask. And again, we go into this thing as a Nolan movie, and the rest of that next 4 minutes is so fastly paced, but that opening image is so like persistent in our minds because it is so anti-Nolan in some ways. For all of Westbrook's faults, and I think people were kind of like, "Oh, Kubrick to Harden is disrespectful," and like that's not what I was saying. Like that's the whole thing. That it's not about a direct comparison. It's just about pacing. And pacing doesn't inherently lead to critical acclaim, just like it doesn't inherently lead to advantage creation. But it's a stylistic similarity, and I think that especially as I wanted to think about the more extremes on it, I wanted to put the players and the directors that I think were best at their respective style. And I think that like Nolan is probably like the premier example, at least for me, in terms of really effectively using those fast-paced scenes. And Harden is the most methodical. He's the greatest methodical player ever, at least in my estimation, from a perimeter perspective. Like, of course, you could some of the post-up players I think are probably like better methodical players, relatively speaking. But in terms of a perimeter creator, I think no one used the art of lulling a player to sleep and then quickly shifting pace. Or I don't think anyone's ever done it better than Harden. And I think Kubrick is up there too in his respective realm.
With Ryan.
Today we are learning basketball with David Lee from the ATL Hawks Film Room, the Hardwood Collective, data engineer out of Georgia Tech, taking over the NBA Twitter storm by storm. How are you doing today, David?
Good. Happy to be here. Love talking about with you, Ryan. So I'm excited to see what we're going to get into today.
Man, I'm excited too. We were gonna start with like a draft analysis pod a couple weeks back, but now it's been a couple weeks, and you keep putting out just amazing content. I don't know what else to call it. It's just very interesting theories, perfect for Twitter, where you can just kind of combine different thoughts. And the one about the directors and basketball players between Christopher Nolan and Russell Westbrook, like it blew my mind as I was listening, and I'm like, oh yes, this is an amazing metaphor here. And the first the funny word that comes to mind is like jump cuts. Like, what do they have in common? Jump cuts. That's what they got in common. But we're gonna break down what else they have in common and what that theory really means, and what you were thinking there, because I thought that was really interesting. So we're gonna dive into that. Maybe dive into one more thought process and evaluation at the end of how players are evaluated by four factors, and how you can target players that help a team's four factors or hurt a team's four factors, and how you can kind of differentiate that in the scouting process. So we'll round it out with that, but we got to start with some draft analysis here. I'm going to pull up your website, The Fifth Factor, where you have a model that ranks all the prospects Can you tell me a little bit about what went into the Fifth Factor website and what you kind of weigh heavily in your model a little bit in terms of what you prioritize in basketball players conceptually for what makes them a good player, why you would draft them ahead of others, and as I pull this up here.
Yeah. So the fifth factor, I initially conceived it as a collegiate prospect tracker because my initial premise was that there's thousands of potential NBA draft prospects and there's hundreds of games on any given day, and it could be really hard throughout the season to get an appropriate feel for every prospect. And in the article that I dropped alongside the initial release of the site, I talked about the futility of trying to use a film exclusive based approach to draft prospects just because of the sheer amount of information you'd have to take in. I mean, this is why people who do it at the NBA level take, this is their entirety of their job, which is going to scout players. But I don't think it's feasible for anyone in the public realm to do it without some sort of integration with their stats. And otherwise, you just get, you get wrecked by small sample biases or archetypal bias or aesthetic bias, whatever it may be. So what I want to do is create like a data-driven watch list. So the underlying metric, not for the model, but for like for the daily leaders, is daily RPM estimate. It was created by Kevin Farragon, and he did that for nylon calculus years ago. But it basically derives stat weights and box score stat weights based on like RPM impact. And so I wanted to bring that to college instead of using something like BPM, because that includes team impact, which wasn't something I was trying to assess. Just like how good of a game was this for this prospect. And I wanted to bring in, I didn't want to use like game score because that's a little bit archaic. So Dre was the underlying metric, and then I also want to introduce like a consistency metric, which is I call COV percentage or coefficient of variation, and so it's like relative to that player's mean, how consistently are they producing within their mean output of daily RPM estimate. And so those are like the two underlying metrics, and took a lot of inspiration from Shran, who did a lot of really interesting things. And that was the initial thing. And then as the season went on, I wanted to think about all these other stats that I consider important to evaluating. And so initially the site was running off box score stats, and then I dipped my toe into the NCAA play-by-play. And so alongside the model drop, or actually I think I dropped the model after that, did the play-by-play. Yeah. But all the play-by-play stats are what I wanted to build like a very modern facing draft model, like incorporating all types of different, some of them proprietary that I created, like adjusted relative true shooting, because I don't have extensive play type data at the collegiate level. So I wanted to adjust a player's efficiency relative to league average, relative to how tough their shot diet was. So I looked at how unassisted their shot diet was, what areas of the floor, things like that, to get an approximation. And so because NCAA play-by-play data is a little bit limited relative to the NBA, some of it is approximations. I wanted to like do relative ATO. I've got a metric on there for like how often a player appears in the play-by-play, which we'll talk about later. I'm pretty sure I've got like 4-factor accounting, which is a concept Dean Oliver came out with. And then I also want to include transition impact there, because that's something I consider the fifth factor. That's where the name for the site came from, is both in a metaphorical sense, like searching for the next sort of edge in terms of winning basketball games, but also in the literal sense that I believe like transition influence is the fifth factor. And so I've always been fascinated with like archetypes. So even when this site used to be just dleaf3.com or something like that. It used to be dleaf3.com, and I just put like a static draft board on there last year. And I always talked about how much I value archetypes and projecting archetypes. And so the final model, which is called Aura Score, like someone like a tongue-in-cheek moment, like because Aura is such a superficial concept, and it's something that's like, you can talk about jokingly, but I wanted to, in the same way, like, Darko is like a tongue-in-cheek, naming of a model, whereas I want to do something like that, and also something that's just relevant. And then, I wanted to make jokes about quantifying Aura. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Aura can't be quantified. Coolness can't be quantified until now.
Right. But the underlying like approach that I took is I wanted to do archetypal projection. And so I read a paper from, I think that was Sloan. It was a Sloan conference either last year or this year, and they were talking about archetypal analysis at the EuroLeague level and the NBA level. And there's two like different approaches you can take to archetypal analysis. There's the more traditional like archetypal, and then there's archetypoid. And the more robust the data, you can kind of use the more refined version. And so because I was using a lot of play-by-play data, I'm going to use the archetype way. And basically just ran it through all of the different stats I have on the site, which at this point is hundreds to like 400 or something like that. And it came down to like a subset of 8 statistics that classify offensive archetypes, and then I think 5 or 6 for defensive. And then the model itself is like a stacker. So first, if you look at the screen that Ryan's sharing, or also describe it for those who are listening, TD RPM is like time decay RPM. And so regularized adjusted plus minus is kind of like a staple for assessing prospect impact. But the issue you run into with college is that, they play 35 games. At the high end, they play 40. And so I wanted to introduce time decay mechanisms even in single year, because I don't particularly care about non-conference play. And I wanted to more heavily weight the more recent games. There's also like schedule adjustments in there, venue, strength, not strength of schedule, but like strength of environment, things like that. And I also wanted to weight players. So for example, Cam Boozer was like the primary creator for Duke. So I wanted to weight players who performed really well with their primary engine off the floor, or in the defensive equivalent with their anchor or whoever it may be. So like, for example, that's why that's one of the reasons Isaiah Evans graded out so well in my RPM estimate, also just in general, because he was able to win his minutes a lot without Cam. And so like that's the underlying like impact estimate. And then there's a bunch of projection layers. So I wanted to look at like, I use dunks and threes, the EPM database, their estimated wins. And then I also want to use their peak EPM and their peak Darko plus minus or DPM. And so to me, there's like 2 different types of impact. There's the value of a replacement, which is like estimated wins contributed. And then there's like peak impact, which is the one number EPM and DPM. And so those are then like the next layer of projected impact. And then the final one is like a stacker that ranks prospects based on like whether they beat out the other in terms of being a better prospect, and then it uses like age and all those other things. So my model, and this is what's interesting, we did a little model wars thing, and we'll continue to do that like throughout the summer over on the Fifth Factor podcast. But there are a lot of models that had Alvin grade, like the top 5 in my model, top 6 is like pretty consistent across like a lot of other and every model is analytically driven, but I think like that was a pretty consistent like top 6. And then I think mine diverges a little bit because of some of the archetypal inclusions or boosting guys with versatility, things like that. Like for example, Malik Thomas graded out pretty well relative to any other models I saw. And like that's something that I think,
from what you just said, I would bet winning his minutes without Darius Acuff, because I saw some of those numbers like net rating wise, like the team was good with Malik on and Acuff off and often. So that could be one factor there.
Yeah, and I think that Malik in particular has a lot more versatility than you'd expect at that position, and in that like his project, like he had a very like even if you click on his name, Malik Thomas, you'll see like there's like a spider chart that I created. It's gonna load a little bit, but it'll show like the distribution of his role at the collegiate level, so you can see like just how evenly distributed. Like he didn't have like one dominant role.
Yeah, and
the ability to be malleable is something that I like highly value.
Sure. He's a really versatile offensive player. I mean, just from like seeing him here and there, like he won the top 100 camp in 24. That's where I caught him. He won MVP or second MVP. Like he was clearly like incredible taking over at top 100 camp back then. And that's top 100 players in the country, but it's a little more of an all-star context, but he was still racking up like assists and buckets. Like He looked like Jamal Crawford is what he reminded me of, where it was just he could do anything out there. Like the ball's on a string, he can hit any shot, any angle, and it's just incredible touch. But it was interesting to see how he was used at Arkansas, because I do think like he might have been underutilized in that sense, because like one thing that is obvious about his game is he's not just a scorer. Like he has good feel, he has good touch, and like he can pass a little bit and make good read and react decisions. He can be kind of a combos efficient scoring guard who can play on and off the ball in that sense. So like that, if there's no ego involved, that's a player that can be used in a whole lot of different ways offensively.
Yeah. And I also did like a bunch of stats for Summer League, and he was probably comfortably the best player at Summer League, especially relative to his age. And there is some predictive stuff with Summer League, like how a player ends up like actually not in terms of the results, but in the process. And Malik, the one thing about Malik that I'll say before we talk about like the winners and losers and all that, it's somewhat tough to be like an efficient offensive player if you don't generate a ton of like free throw attempts and you're like a sub 52-point scorer, and that's probably going to be where he's going to be, at least definitely for the first couple years of his career. And I think that for Malik as well, he was asked to do a lot more off ball at Arkansas, and he was still effective. But I think that's why he was so bad from 2-point range, because he's not having the benefit of, attacking downhill from the top of the key where he can use some of his craft. And when you're having to drive closeouts and maintain your line against physicality and meet rim protectors, it's just not as easy for someone with his frame. So I would expect him to be a little bit more effective at the 2-point level. But when you look at like sub 50% from 2 last year, and guys who like really think it's a free throw line, it's more like guys like Dennis Jenkins or even Dennis Schroeder. And I think the one thing that Malik has over those guys is just the shooting projection. He's legitimately, I think I looked back into him like at high school when he was at OTE too. Like we're talking like 40% on pull-up threes on like 400 plus attempts, and knockdown free throw shooter too. So I think he'll be enough. He'll have more than enough shooting touch, I think. But I think the on-ball stuff, seeing Cleveland like really let him do that in summer league, I think really makes me feel good about his future, even if there are some idiosyncrasies. So I think with the way that Cleveland's building their roster, where I don't think he's not gonna have those many reps as I'd like.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation there where I was a little surprised by the pick, but I've warmed up to it a little more. Where like if you can kind of see Harden and Mitchell already being these two like all-star version of combo guards, where maybe he kind of assumes something of a 6th or 7th man role, where once those guys come off the bench, then he gets some of those reps on the ball as like a creator type guard. But on the contrary, if he's playing with either of those guys, they're probably going to have the ball in their hands, so he will kind of be back in that off-ball role. But that does go to show at least like his versatility on and off the ball, being able to space the floor off of them, even if it's not ideal role, he can still hit that catch and shoot shot. And then I agree where his development reps come in are more on-ball reps, creating offense for his team, letting him maybe score first, but having the option to score or create the advantage and then make the decision. And he's good at those things. And like, I want to see him get those reps there too. I kept mocking him to New York because I just wanted to see him like get a little more runway, I guess. His game like feels, especially maybe it's Jamal Crawford playing there. His game just feels perfect for the Garden. Like, I just want to see Malik Thomas like go off for a big game in a big moment like that. So that will be a fun fit. But you already hit on what we were going to look back here, and shout out to the model too, because we must have some things in common in our logical thinking, because this is how my big board also resembles some of this. I think I go a little more like pro analytics on my big board. It's probably like 60-40 or 70-30 or something towards like BPM as a general basis, as one good tool for projecting future impact or potential stars. But I don't have it in front of me, but like that's my top 9 as well in a slightly different, like 9 of the top 10. Like, I'll pull up mine in a second just to have it as reference, but pull up here. What is the best value or the best pick of the draft? Is it just Boozer number 1? And if it is, then what's the second best pick or value of the draft?
Yeah. I mean, so like relative to pick, the player that the model was higher on, like by the biggest differential, was Vesar. And I think I kind of disagree with that to an extent, because I think the problem with Vesar, he's just so light, and he's already old enough to where like I don't think I would project like a ton of bulk being added. But from a skill perspective, I think like getting Vesar top 30, if a team would have took him first round, I wouldn't have been as like, just from a value perspective. But I think getting him at 52, even if it was some agent work to get him down there, I think that's like kind of like undoubtedly, like I think he's very reminiscent of like Landale, for example. And Lando isn't someone who was highly valued by the league. He was basically cut, and then he got traded as like a salary matching at the deadline. But then this year the Hawks give him 1 year an $11 million contract, and like with the league shifting back towards giving these bigs, like if you're anywhere near a rotation big, you're probably getting the MLE.
Yeah,
and
no doubt.
Day'Ron Sharp was 2 year $10 million. Um, you see the value like what Steven Adams has done for his contract too. So I think that I would agree with the model there that it's value, but I would say like the number one for me is probably going to be I think Boozer. Just getting him at 3. I think getting Malik in the second round, Graves
Mm,
at 19, and even Abuka at 17. There's a
yeah,
lot of like great value there. Um, I think it also really like on Yenso, and like I mentioned, I like Isaiah Evans.
yeah.
And I'm just very concerned. Like I think the thing that's concerned me so much about Isaiah before I looked at where my model put him again was the weight, like just the weight relative to position, especially for Minnesota, where Minnesota's losing a lot of their physicality, right? Like for all the things that Randall introduced in terms of like the things that didn't quite work in Minnesota, like he established a physical floor, and now they just don't have as much size, they don't have as much resistance, and that's one thing. I mean, his nickname is Slim. Like Isaiah is not the most physical guy, and but there is something to be said about a movement shooter being able to maintain that level of offense that he did with Cam off the floor, and also being able to coexist and also have that same sort of like track record going back when he played with Flag. And so I think he's got some very conducive skills. And I think movement shooting in general, if you're even just anywhere near a plus defender, I think that movement shooters are some of the more intriguing players that you can introduce into any offensive lineup just because. And also, he has some passing to him. Like, like he's not like a Garrison Matthews, for example, right? He has a little bit more
He can
passing.
attack a closeout and has some bursts. Like I've definitely, I think he's proven something of a like he can be good in a role player role of hitting those threes and moving off ball and attacking closeouts through the leverage that some other player created. And I do like that fit in terms of like the backcourt. I think the most like it seemed like shooting and point guards are kind of what they needed in Minnesota a little bit was either a point guard to help before the LaMelo trade was like a point guard to help some of the playmaking and ideally just a catch and shoot 3-point shooter to off of all of Ant's and double teams and Randall getting doubled at times and in the paint just more spacing. So I did like Evans in that sense and then they end up getting LaMelo and make a lot of moves. So it does feel like they're really betting on maybe the volatility of the 3-ball and maybe combining a little bit of that Hornets magic with Anthony somehow, some way with all that shooting. And I mean, it'll be an interesting fit. I'm excited to see that backcourt. That's probably one of the more interesting teams next year of just like what's going to happen. Are they going to like blow up in everyone's faces? Is there going to be some craziness or is it going to work? And you have like two of the most exciting players in the NBA on the same team that can do all these dynamic different things. Like it's going to be really fun to watch, like easily league pass top team. Sure. And we'll see, win wise where it goes. Totally agree. Visar almost unfairly seems like one of the more valuable picks just because of the slot, right? Because like that's like a fringe first round level talent all the way at 52. It reminded me of a little bit of just Kalkbrenner falling into the second round the year before, but he was like 32 or 31 or something very high in the second round. The idea that he fell all the way to 52, like any pick past 45 these days, I figure is almost not an asset, but like something that has lost value because most prospects would just rather become an undrafted free agent and choose their own destination by that point, or they're going back to NIL for the NCAA. So it's just you never really see that value that late. So that is some great value. I like I've always liked Otega Owe. I think he's bring some real defensive impact hustle. Like he could, the moment they traded Lou Dort and brought in Otega Owe and OKC, it just felt like two ships passing in the night in a sense like that. Between those talents and the roles that they could fill. Braden Smith, kind of a fun one in the second round, back to Indiana. He's a really exciting point guard. But yeah, you hit on, I think, some of the best value. I mean, Boozer is incredible. I think that's just got to be my top pick of the draft because I think he's that good. But I'm very much with you on. I had like the Hawks with Fleming, Zuby, and Visar as after Boozer and Peterson are kind of my top two like favorite just picks to teams. But I think the Hawks draft haul was probably what I would rate as the best draft haul in sense altogether, or at least third overall if you're counting the individual talents of the other two ahead of them. Between Flemings and Zuby and Visar, like I already thought they had two of the best two-way talents added to their team of two-way versatility. And Fleming's this incredibly elite playmaker that you're betting on as like you have a point guard that plays defense and realistically projects to hit pull-up threes and be a walking paint touch, drive and kick, foul drawing. Like you could have another Dylan Harper on your hands right here, or just like a really, really franchise point guard talent at the very least. And so I love that pick. I was really high on Zuby because of his two-way impact. Wasn't sure where, I don't know why, but where's your model have Zuby here?
It did not like Zuby.
Oh, it didn't like Zuby. There it is. So
like
that was interesting because he was a little maybe polarizing is a word, where he was kind of all over draft boards, but I really liked his when I ended up seeing his Cerebro numbers and comparing him to some of the other versatile forwards in that range, I just really came away noticing a little higher two-way impact and overall versatility from his game than the other ace defenders in this class. And that, I think, could give him a little more two-way impact and two-way versatility long-term, is just his ability to score downhill on top of being this elite defender that can, bring a lot of different skills to the table. So just to shout out a few other fun fits. I love Phylon, so getting him that early, or that late, I should say, is good value in my eyes. Yaxel Lendenberg to the Warriors is still my favorite pick of the draft, and totally with you with Alan Graves to Toronto. That's incredible value. I liked Anderson and Steinbach to the Hornets as well. And I mean, Sergio in Dallas, Carr in LA, and Sinak in Boston. Like a lot of these are interesting fits that I think give guys a pretty good opportunity in a place where like they have the skills to fill the role they're being asked of and have some room to develop, where it's not too much too soon or overdoing it. And I've talked a million times about Abuko, Corey, but one of my favorite prospects in this class, I think it's a home run for Detroit on that sense. Plus Onyenso in the second round, like that was two potential rotation players and maybe a star in Abuka. I really, really love him. I wanted to real quick. I'll run through some of my similarities with this model. I had Boozer 1. You have Boozer 1 on this model. I have Graves 8th. Graves on the model is 2nd. I had Wilson 3. You had Wilson 3. I had Abuka 4. You have Abuka 4. I have Kingston 5. You have Kingston 6. Wagler, I ended up just he's the one I struggle with the most, I think, because I'm totally sold on the offensive creation and I just totally unsold on the defense. And I just didn't know where that ended up for me, of like, even if the defense is like ends up neutral or even if it's terrible, like how good could this offense be? And the offense can be really special because I really love his way. I think that's the one I'm going to most regret, is just ending up moving him down from like 7 to 13 is where I ended up, because I ended up betting on basically guys I viewed as more versatile with two-way impact. And that could come back to bite me in terms of betting on the right talents. But ultimately, I thought that there was a handful of guys that will help their teams win with the two-way impact for more reasons. But he's such a special talent. I kind of hope I'm wrong on that one. Like, that's the one where I look back and I'm like, what was I thinking? He should be like just a little higher there. But either way, I really, that's a fun one. And then Swain, I have 10, you have 7. Tabonsa, you have 8, I have 9. We're both a little lower there on the possibilities. Phylon, your side has 9, and I'm saying your model has 9. Maybe your ultimate rankings were a little bit off of this as well. But Phylon, I got 6. You got Phylon at 9, and Isaiah Evans, you have 10. I have 29, and then Christian Anderson, I have 12. You have him 11, and Malik, I have 22, and you have 12. So and Burry's is pretty high too. I have 15, you have 13. So I'll stop it there. But I just thought, I was like, man, I've seen this order before. It looks similar to how I ended up. So I just appreciated that your model reflected some of the similarities of what I was looking at too. And that kind of reassured that maybe I got some things right. If D. Lee's on it, then I'm following the right guy here. So, to round out the draft here, anything we didn't get to in terms of like, was there a bad fit? Like, do you think your model is saying like, you don't see this at all? Like, and it doesn't mean they're a bad player or a bad prospect, more so just a questionable fit. And that could be, is this prospect actually going to get reps to develop in this situation and be their best self? Because maybe not. Or it could be, is this player actually going to help my team win next year? Because sometimes that's baked in the equation too, even though I don't really think it should be as much as it is when you're making a draft pick. But that is, at the end of the day, there's a ton of different strategy and evaluation going on with why teams make draft picks. Some teams need help now, some teams need help in the future and are betting on talent, and it all goes together. So are there any names that stand out to you?
I think, and this is something I've tried to talk to people about, but like handling for age is going to be really interesting in modeling because a lot of the training data in modeling is, it's 10 years old. And if you were a senior 10 years ago and you're entering the draft, you probably weren't good enough early. But now, if you're a senior entering the draft, you probably were too good to come into the draft. Like Yaxel, for example, I think he got dinged too heavily by my model for age. But I don't want to adjust the model for one player, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of times
like they did with Russell Westbrook when he broke the BPM metric?
Yeah, like I think that's generally, I just kind of feel like that's not the type of process I want to make. But I did include an adjusting for pick functionality on the site, which doesn't change the overall score, but it does change the projections in terms of how much how their impact projects. And so I think that Yaxel, because the most valuable resource for development is minutes, right? Mm-hmm. And Yaxel going 11 with his skill set, I think he's going to immediately help Golden State win. I think that
agreed.
Abuka could probably play a lot earlier than people might think.
Oh yeah,
and I think he would bring a skill set that they really need.
He might be their second best scorer, day two. No offense to Detroit, but he might be one of their best options offensively. I'm a huge Asar guy. He might be the best defensive wing in the whole league. But in terms of somebody setting up the offense and running the show, I really, it's such a great pick. Tell me more about why you like that fit as well. Because I've talked enough about it.
Yeah, I think we talked about this with J. Kyle Mann, but I love the idea of contrasting styles in the backcourt.
Yeah.
In Charlotte last year, it was...
The one I think of is the Clippers complimentary backcourt of Lob City. Chris Paul, JJ Redick, and then at first it was Eric Bledsoe. So you have this point guard, cerebral thinker, this off-ball three-point shooter, and this just downhill athletic force of nature, just wrecking ball, where the defense now has to prepare, instead of just preparing for a system, they have to prepare for diverging threats all at once.
Yeah, exactly. And we saw with Charlotte, it was really effective, where some of LaMelo's chaos is both placated, but also offset, but also accentuated by Khan's steadiness in terms of where Khan's always a release valve, or Khan may not be willing to throw this pass, but LaMelo is, or LaMelo's putting more pressure on the rim and Khan knows how to fill it. So it's this natural ebb and flow. And I think that's I don't know if that's what Detroit was going for with Ivy and Cade, but I think that they got a much more capable version of that in Abuka in terms of being a downhill guy, puts a lot of pressure on the rim. So I love that idea there. And I think Danis Jenkins is going to he's overtasked as a handler, but clearly Detroit needs more people to disperse the creation load off of Cade. And I've always felt like Cade can function as a wing. I don't think he's necessarily is a wing, but I think I don't think Helio Cade is the ideal way to build that roster in Detroit. But we'll see for them because they're going to be a little bit less defensively slanted this year, I think. But maybe they'll give Paul Reed some more tick, and I wouldn't want to throw Abuka into the fire day one, but his the biggest translation stat from summer league to NBA is rim rate, and unassisted percentage is also really high. And what did Abuka do? He got to the rim at a crazy rate on 80% of his shots were unassisted, just like it was in college.
Yeah, and
so I feel very comfortable saying he's going to have that same ability to put pressure on the rim in the NBA. Now, will he be effective at the rim? I think that is something that a lot of the times these guys who play with crazy pace have to figure out how to decelerate. And the thing about Abuka though is his reach is so much longer than his frame. I don't really think it's an issue with him getting there or him being bothered. I just think he has some nuances he has to tease out with the way he plays. But he's the exact type of guard I want him to take. And then the Thunder took Sturts, And
Mm.
Sturts didn't perform well in my model either, and I think a lot of that is age. But I think that I talked about this with the on the Topic Thunder podcast, but Sturts has the ability to be like a Shea approximation and like an Isaiah Joe. And when we talk about another real shooter, like one of the toughest shot diets in college basketball, not just in recent memory, but probably in history. So many threes off the dribble. He had like a 58 effective field goal percentage off the dribble last year. And I think that he'll be able to bring them a lot more dynamism offensively. That's another team that's kind of like shifting away from the defensive only identity and trying to reduce some of the load off Shea, having them play off the ball. So I think Sturts will be really good for them too.
Yeah, I mean, pairing him with Mara like really makes a lot of sense once you end up with both. Just kind of a natural pick and roll partnership to grow together that like basically is growing on their like third team at this point. Maybe their second team. Sturts is probably higher than Mara, I guess, on the depth chart at this point. But definitely interested to see that one. And Sturts is special. I ended up with him, both of them, 20 and 21 actually, but so slightly lower I think than consensus. But Sturts is a really special point guard for sure. And yeah, it's interesting about the age and how to evaluate it, because I totally agree. Like I had Yaxel 7th and on the board, and with the Warriors, like perfect fit because he's a little older. Like that's an example where like you don't necessarily like very clearly the team that just failed the 2 timelines plan does not need to be hunting the 3rd timeline. Like focus on the first one here. Like that's an example of the draft is an avenue to get players and talent, one of 3 avenues. The Warriors have very few options to find any players or talent at this point with in terms of assets to use, and they have a draft pick. There's a player who fits perfectly with exactly what works with Steph, with defense and versatility and playmaking and a little scoring versatility to boot. He's falling because of age, but like you're trying to win now. You want someone who is closer to their prime athletically and can play now and compete now. And the idea that like he's going to be 24 or 25 when his 7 years of NBA contract team rights start, like that to me is a good thing for Golden State, because they're now gonna have his rights through his 7 years of his rookie deal and the extension through his entire prime of his career in theory of his athleticism. So like the idea that, and no one's really saying it's a bad pick, but I think it's a great example of it doesn't always have to be long-term potential based on 18 years old and projecting everything. Like if there's a good basketball player who obviously had incredible high impact off the charts analytically and from all the BPM ratings and any of them, Cerebros and Rapum, like he just off the charts analytically, off the charts statistically, looks like a force of nature, clearly a winning 2-way basketball player that has high feel for the game and like perfectly matches with Steph in theory. It's a home run of a pick. And I think that's a great example where like targeting good basketball players at a certain point in the draft is a good strategy. And I'm starting to like really weigh that more heavily earlier in the draft than ever before. I think when I first got into draft theory, it's all about star hunting and if there's a chance this guy can be a star, you got to go all in. But at a certain point, like you are gambling on potential. Like if you're not more so betting on data or stats to back it up a little bit to project. So just being able to combine all the tools in the process is huge. And I think we're getting closer to a point where drafting older basketball players who are good and you think they have limited potential, I think that's gone out of the way a little bit, because these are professional basketball players at the NCAA level now, making NIL. And I just think it's another avenue to find good players, especially for a team with limited assets. And like he could have, he's not going to lead rookies in scoring, but he could be one of the most impactful rookies, if not the most impactful one, by year 1. And it could be that way for multiple years. And I think people get a little too comparative as well when it comes to this as well, because it's almost like all these players are compared until this moment. And now, like if you're the 29th player on the team, the 29th draft pick, there are no more, like, the comparisons are for the media. Like, none of the comparisons matter after that point. Like, you're just a rookie in the NBA. You got picked later than the other guy, but you have just as much kind of opportunity to succeed and possibly win your battle as the other guy. Maybe a little less support, but I think it's interesting, just draft conceptually either way there.
Yeah.
And so let's shift over here to the director thing. I don't even know how to introduce it. I'm gonna let you introduce it. Where you had a viral tweet go viral the other day, comparing the pacing of directors to the pacing of basketball players, and I thought it was just brilliant. There was a tweet that started out with kind of a funny idea analytically, where they measured film directors by average shot length, and Tony Scott, Michael Bay, Christopher Nolan, David Fincher were all under 4 seconds per shot length. And then, Paul Thomas Anderson, Billy Wilder, Woody Allen were all much longer, 12, 17 seconds. And you found a way to compare it to basketball players and deceleration. And I just thought it was really interesting. What brought you to this idea? Was it just seeing that first tweet and it just kind of sparked everything? And, how did you end up kind of producing this theory?
Yeah, I saw the shot length tweet, and I was just like, yeah, this is like statistics for film. Like I'm all in on this.
I'm all in.
And I'm just kind of wired at this point to make connections to basketball everywhere. It's kind of like the nature of what it's my biggest interest. It's what I love talking about the most. And I think that generally speaking, like, people have a convention in mind, and when people break convention, it could be viewed as like almost like a problem, or people don't appropriately adjust for error. Like, it's not a coincidence that some of the older directors here are the ones who are cutting at a higher or a lower frequency. And in the video, I talked about how if you go back and you watch Space Odyssey, or 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you watch it with a modern brain, you can't help but notice how long the shots are. And that movie was groundbreaking in a lot of ways, but from a technological standpoint at that time, like, it was a marvel. And so you can understand in that context why they let those shots like persist for so long. But also the average film enjoyer at that time didn't have any other things taken away from their enjoyment of the film. They didn't have handheld devices, whatever it may be. Like, people went to the film and they just watched the film. People weren't watching movies at home. And I wanted to base my argument around the fact that there are conventions in everything, in film and basketball. And conventions can be effective, again, universally, right? Like, the reason why a director might let a shot breathe is because they want to emphasize something. But the barometer for, like, that amount, there's no exact amount of time that a shot has to be on screen for us to understand it's supposed to be something that's emphasized. And I wanted to tie that back to, like, the people will, and this kind of applies to even like Keaton Wagler. Keaton Wagler is not the most aesthetic or conventional advantage creator, but he was one of the best in basketball at his age for one of the best teams in the league against multiple types of defenses and coverages. And so even though it doesn't meet our convention, his technique is still effective. And so I wanted to separate, like, our critiques of the process. It's reductive to critique the process if the results are strong and if it's not what we expected. And so, like, for Nolan, I think he's overly criticized for his average shot length. That people said the Odyssey was too fast paced, but they're forgetting that, first off, this movie was shot on a format that they only could do 2.5 minutes of film at a time. And it was done in a completely analog process. They're splicing together scenes, and it's a 3-hour movie. There are going to be faster paced scenes in a movie that's that long. And then I thought that at no point when I watched the movie, because I have the expectation that Nolan is a fast paced director, at no point did I feel like there were inopportune moments where he didn't slow down enough, because his slowing down is relative and different to every other director. And so that was basically my argument, is like, Stephon Castle is a much more almost spastic player and a much faster player than Luka Doncic, but they're both exceptional at the slow step. And it's because their modulation is different, but the impact of slowing down is still consistent. And so then I wanted to put the directors on, like, a timeline, and then some of the greatest, like, perimeter creators in NBA history, and sort of place them alongside, like, more methodical and the more like the more faster paced creators, just to sort of illustrate the fact that like creation, like these are two separate concepts. Like we can't assign the validity of play style to advantage creation. Like there are definitely things, again, there's conventions about things that make those things more, makes it more easy for someone's play style to translate to being a good advantage creator. But all of these guys in their own way are strong advantage creators, even though their play styles vary so differently. And even with their play styles varying, some of the moves that they all consistently use are still effective. And so that was more so and I think I had gotten a comment. I'm blanking on the exact word, but it said something along. So like, what is the point that I'm making? Like, is it that we shouldn't critique a play style, or that there isn't like one true play style? And I think that's kind of it, but it's more so like pace is relative. Advantage creation, in some ways, advantage creation is objective, but pace is relative, and it's a subjective art to reach an objective goal. And the objective goal from the film directors is to impress their audience and give them some sort of emotional feeling or some sort of emphasis on a scene. And then for basketball players, is to create that advantage, but you want to be able to also subvert expectations in both mediums, because like, if your defender can predict what you want to do every time. So it's like, I think pacing is how you modulate and you subvert expectations. And it's that's where I saw like the biggest similarity between the two.
Yeah, I mean, a ton of interesting concepts there. I mean, you talked about like why is pace increasing in both as well, because I thought that is another corollary. Like that is true of all of both the movies and the game, and it's probably for different reasons. I do agree that attention span is probably a part of it for the in terms of the movies side of things for why it's cutting down. But I think it's super interesting. I mean, I think I totally agree that it kind of comes. It's like a in the eye of the beholder a little bit, where your taste can affect kind of which side of the line maybe you think is better. But ultimately, the point is like everyone likes what they like, and these are all popular movies, so they've all reached their goals and been effective movies, and they were all created in different ways. And to your point, the pace can be something of a factor of the surprise factor, because if every movie was just a 6-second like clip, or was just broken up by 6 seconds, or whatever the ideal shot length was, then nothing would feel any good or special or different. Like it would just everything would feel the same. So obviously, like part of the process is they wanted to make it their own. They wanted to match their style. They want to make something new while still leaning on things that have worked before, and that's part of the creative process there. But yeah, I mean, Wagler's a great shout. With all three of them, obviously, like have a great deceleration ability, where that ability to slow down as you're driving to the hoop, and that throws off the opponents, like you said, and maybe like in the film director side of things, the quick shots throws off the viewers in that sense. What's funny, I mean, on what you're saying movie wise, I definitely I must fall on the left side of this movie shot length, because someone like Michael Bay movies, I can feel those clips, or those cuts. I can feel that every like 2 or 3 seconds it's cut. But like Christopher Nolan and like Scorsese is kind of in my sweet spot of the movies that I like. So maybe I'm just used to it, because I don't feel it's too quick at all. It just feels entertaining. So that's where my attention span has gotten me, where Michael Bay is still a little too fast, but I'm good with 3 seconds is a little much, but 3.5 to like 5.8, maybe that's my sweet spot as a movie fan. So, just to kind of further explain a metaphor here, you mentioned Westbrook in your video as well. What kind of similarities would you have between Westbrook and Christopher Nolan through this metaphor?
Yeah, I think like Westbrook is like such a breakneck pace, and Nolan is so often doing action movies or adventure movies, and so the pacing suits the medium too, or like the subject matter. Like I think it's when you're shooting war scenes in the Odyssey, or Batman fighting Joker, you want the audience to feel excited and on a bit on edge. And I think that Nolan does a really good job playing into the feeling that he's able to evoke from an audience. And I think that, especially with Westbrook retiring, I mean, I obviously didn't know at that time, but I've watched a lot more of him recently. And the the times that Russell is slowing down, it's still a lot faster than other people slowing down. But that's just because he's usually at Mach speed. Like, he's so often he would grab a defensive rebound and just go at a breakneck pace. And I think that his understanding of I can still be a quick decision maker. I can still be a fast player, but I can slow down just enough to create this advantage. One of my favorite, my favorite pass from him is when he does the sham god until the dump off to Steven Adams, and it's like it's just a great example of like the change of direction, the pacing, and then the showmanship too. And like
that effective flair is the term
Yeah.
that I use, where like
Yeah.
he's not being a showboat. He's so good at basketball, he can throw 3 different elite moves into a highlight. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like LaMelo, the way he plays too. It's like, this is just what he does.
Yeah, it's a functional showmanship. And then I think a lot about like the technical aspects of some of the things that Nolan has done. Like, when you see that wave in Interstellar, or when he opens the movie, I think I talked about it in the video. He opens The Dark Knight with a 7-second shot of Joker,
Right, with the
zooming
mask.
in onto the mask. And again, we go into this thing as a Nolan movie, and the rest of that next 4 minutes is so fastly paced, but we're still, that opening image is so like persistent in our minds because it is so anti-Nolan in some ways. And so I think for all of Westbrook's faults, and I think people were kind of like, oh, Kubrick to Harden is disrespectful, and like that's not what I was saying. Like, that's the whole thing. Like, it's not about a direct comparison. It's just about pacing, and pacing doesn't inherently lead to critical acclaim, just like it doesn't inherently lead to advantage creation. But it's a stylistic similarity, and I think that especially as I wanted to think about the more extremes on it, I wanted to put the players and the directors that I think were best at their respective style. And I think that like Nolan is probably like the premier example, at least for me, in terms of really effectively using those fast-paced scenes. And Harden is the most methodical. He's the greatest methodical player ever, at least in my estimation, from a perimeter perspective. Like, of course, you could, some of the post-up players are probably like better methodical players, relatively speaking. But in terms of a perimeter creator, I think no one used the art of lulling a player to sleep and then quickly shifting pace, or I don't think anyone's ever done it better than Harden. And I think Kubrick is up there too in his respective realm.
No doubt. There it is. It's more of a comparison of the general styles, and like I think, as you said, you're comparing pace here. They're both of these are kind of like the measure of success is different for both. Like it is, while both are entertainment in basketball and movies, like the movie's goal is entertainment. It is box office sales, tickets from who made the best entertainment and who can produce the most revenue or make the biggest cultural impact. And, we generally measure that from record sales or movie sales or ticket sales. Like, we're not measuring these guys by how popular they are due to their pace. We're in terms of analyzing basketball players. We're probably analyzing their efficiency or their ability to create efficient offense for their team through their use of that pace. And so to your point, you're not comparing them like as in any way other than the pace of play, and how the pace that directors play with and use and master is somewhat similar to how offensive players, ball handlers, perimeter creators control the pace of play in basketball. And I think there's definitely a lot of spot on comparisons there. I think it's really interesting. Do you have any other like names on here that kind of stand out for a comparison that you didn't get to in the video?
I mean, I was kind of just thinking about like, and there's probably something to be said about the timelessness of someone who's more in the medium area of like pacing in both in film and basketball, right? Like,
take Spielberg maybe off the top there. I mean, that's
right. Like Spielberg
that's my shot there.
Or even Scorsese, who's a good bit more methodical than Nolan, but still considered one of the greatest ever, and like has been enjoyed to the same extent across eras.
Exactly. That's actually who I meant, but both are obviously legendary. I just read the list, but Scorsese. I mean, I'm a mob movie guy, so like De Niro and Scorsese, I'm tuning in. So
Yeah,
that's
for
my
sure.
kind of movie. So, and those are generational. I mean, it helps that they're on TV all the time. I think that's one reason they last forever. But these are from the '50s, and they're as high quality as anything, and they're still average pace by this measurement. But an example that I think if people give time of day to enjoying entertainment for what it is and can actually focus on it, that they might like things that move a little slower than they realize.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that this is maybe unintentional, but maybe I did this subconsciously. But if you look at the middle clustering of players, these are all the ones who like either enjoyed the most playoff success or won championships.
Mm.
And on the outskirts, the more extremes are the players who either have flamed out to a bit in the playoffs, and I think that kind of speaks to the predictability to an extent, where it's like people, like I mentioned, people go into a Nolan movie expecting a certain thing, just like they go into a Kubrick movie, and maybe that doesn't translate as well across eras. Like maybe, if you were to show a Christopher Nolan film to someone from the '40s, they're gonna be overwhelmed with the information of the speed.
If you show someone, overwhelmed with a lot, probably.
Yeah. All the effects and all that. But if you took someone from if you took the average high schooler and made them watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, they're going to be bored out of their mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame, because that's just kind of where it is at this point. But I think the ability to live in a happy medium, I think, and this is something I have developed, and I feel like this is something that I'd have to really want to study for real, but being able to comfortably exist in both extremes at any given moment is the pinnacle of advantage creation, right? Like, Ibuka doesn't just play at a breakneck pace all the time, so it's like,
exactly.
Whether you don't want to being unpredictable is the biggest asset you could have
totally
in basketball. And maybe that's
especially
not the
when you have the skills to pull it off, like being able to have the skills and the feel and athleticism to be different every time down and to not meet the expectation every time down. And to me, it is kind of more instead of a one side is good, one side is bad. It's a display of all the different types of creators that are all good in different ways and appreciated in different ways. And some people lean towards enjoying different ways. And I think just from a fan perspective, that's kind of what this is getting at more than an analyst perspective of like, we're going to evaluate who's the best creator. Like, no, this is more how you can enjoy any creator if you can just kind of know what you're getting into instead of trying to judge everyone in the same box. Like if you're measuring Russell Westbrook's shooting efficiency, he's going to look a lot worse than James Harden. And if you're measuring every other stat that Westbrook does, he's going to look just as good or better than James Harden in a lot of ways. And it's not that simple. But like if you just put a guy in a box, you're not going to really, you can't judge the fish by his ability to fly, as the saying goes. But man, this was really interesting. I don't think we have time for the worst of all time players today because we're running up against the clock. Thanks so much for taking the time today, David. It's been a lot of fun and super interesting stuff. I appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, appreciate you, Ryan.